Right, this is going to be another episode of Thorin's Big Brains. So in the top right-hand corner, we've got Vu, not that really sick guy who won all that money in Painkiller and Quake and stuff, just a guy from NA, basically, you know, it's an NA streamer, right, and YouTuber.
That's the one they know me for.
Exactly. And I'll also say, I appreciate you because to me, you're the healthy antidote to the fuckboy nature of Launders when he's on Twitter. Launders in real life, cool guy. When he's on shows, pretty interesting guy. On Twitter, probably the most, like, I would say, lowest common denominator individual maybe to ever grace esports. Because he sometimes isn't even joking with some of those tweets. They really are just that bad. Whereas what Vu does is, he tweets like he's Launders, but ironically. And as we all know, anyone who's over the age of 14, when you do the same thing but slightly ironically, that's just a little bit cooler. It's not cool in itself, let's be real. It's just a little bit cooler, isn't it? You know, I've nailed it right there. Like, anthropological read was fucking sick, mate.
Yeah, you got me. I think you got me down to a T. I got the fake fanfic stories that are definitely not meant to be funny, but they're hilarious. You know, we got it all going. Yes,
exactly. And of course, we've got dusT here in the bottom right-hand corner, who actually I've been informed, checking, no, it hasn't changed. He's not going to be committing career suicide explicitly on this show. That's actually what Vince does at the moment in the partnership. If it indeed is a partnership, if indeed they're even in CSGO still. Actually, why are you on this show? It isn't a Valorant show. No, whatever, anyway. People know, obviously, always interested to hear dusT's thoughts on these shows. I think he's actually a pretty good panel member for these kind of things.
I mean, you're the only gig I've got in Counter-Strike
these
days. So, I mean, like, competitive rates as well, you know, I must say, compared to all the rest of the rates I'm being offered in Counter-Strike, a grand total of $0. So, yeah, it's going great. Love being here.
And as yet, and look, I am battling, boys, believe it or not, as yet, one of the few people not to take the filthy money from all the... You know what? I'll tell everyone a quick side anecdote. People are going to think I'm trolling. Years ago, when esports first started getting venture capital, but I knew back then, we're still so far from any kind of monetization. So the first people who do the venture capital are going to either get burned, double down, or just leave. They're just going to go, you know, they were the initial people, and then you get the next round. I had a joke years ago where I said, bearing in mind right now we can't monetize esports. Why don't they just make esports to appeal to all the worst people in the world as a money laundering scheme? And I said, what you should do, this is even how I described it, as I said, you should go and get South American drug lords, Eastern European pimps, and North African gun runners. And you should just go to them and go, look, we've got this digital space called esports. We need a cash injection. You've got all that dirty money that you can't get done except through maybe secret banks that we won't reveal now. And you need it cleaned, right? So put it into this tournament. You know, we're not going to give you much back, but you're not getting that much anyway. And that's how you do. The joke is, it's like someone was just taking notes. And now we're here, boys. So, and believe it or not, that was just a fucking pithy thing to say back in the day when it was still just a joke, not a fucked up Black Mirror episode. But let's get into it, because one thing that's not a Black Mirror episode is the bright future of NA CSGO. Because actually, fully enough, that even ties to the new thing. They're doing all this initiative where they're going to like give teams like a cash incentive or something if you have an NA team instead of an EU team. So there's all these reasons, right, as to why people should start to again care. Spoiler, now that ESL's worth $1 billion, I imagine they will integrate NA more. And there's been more of a league. So if we're looking to come back, the timing's perfect because all these massive roster moves have happened. And basically, the big two in NA have done the shuffle, brought in different players, and they're both going a different direction. And then you've even got, for my money, interesting squads like the coL project. I think people probably are sleeping on that one a little bit if you look at some of the names. And then you can even say, as an aside, if we're including Brazilians, there's obviously safe to pain, to Furia rather, which is, again, one of the most slam dunk. That's like a ROPS to phase one. It's like every person in the equation wants it. Yes, can we please have it? And thankfully it happened, unlike the ROPS one where we took like 1 year of being blue balls. So let's just start, right? We're just going to discuss mainly the NA rosters here, because I still think there's so many angles you can go on these. Like, I know the names on, like, for example, if you talk about the EG one, you know all the names, but do you know the names in 2022 is my question. So, Vu, I want to start out with, if we go with the Evil Geniuses one first, this is the one where they teased it initially as though it was like the major winning lineup. Like, spoiler, I definitely didn't see Breeze and fucking Cirque in that major winning lineup. There was a certain guy called Skadoodle who kept getting away with it once more time. You know, why not? Why not go out the way you lived, Skadoodle? So obviously, they put together this team, seemingly at the behest of Stewie 2K. People might know, as far as I know, the rumours were true. The rumour was it would be Stewie and Naf would go and would make this squad. As far as I know, Naf was the player always who was sort of more, if you just think of his past teammates, a little bit more tilted to the EG group maybe than the traditional Team Liquid clique, as it were, even though he was in that team for many years. He decided to stay instead. Maybe Elish told him, like, whatever, I'll only be passive aggressive to you 10% less or something. I don't fucking know what dealing struck. So anyway, he stayed in Team Liquid and got ranked top 20 because obviously those mean absolutely nothing now. That's how much these teams suck. Some of these teams had 2 top 20 players and they couldn't even fucking win the tournament ever. How bad are your teams? Anyway, that's really more about how bad HLTV is. So let's get into this angle. The new EG lineup view is Stewie2K, his old mate Automax come back from Valorant. He's obviously got Rush, who was sort of in wasteland of post-coL. No one knew if he'd be signed to a team. In fact, there was rumours maybe he even went to this complexity lineup now, the one where they've got all the sort of lesser names, and he'd have been like, you know, sort of a veteran figure. And then they've kept the 2 players from the previous EG, Breeze and Cirque, who obviously at their peak were thought to be the star players. I imagine most people would say it as. What are your thoughts on this team? Like initial expectations, like is it a good lineup? Are you actually happy with this project? Do you see it going places?
I kind of have the same feeling about EG that I'm, spoiler, going to have about complexity, which is that I'm not certain on the opping. I mean, I've looked into Cirque's opping recently, and the best games you can see Cirque have recently are games where he's not fucking opping. It's when he's rifling. With the op in his hand, I mean, he got out-op dueled like 3 times by Lucky. Lucky just peeking into him and killing him. Like, Cirque's opping is just lost. I don't know what the fuck happened to it. He was good for a while, and now he's just completely lost. To be fair, some of it is that when you're opping and you're trying to play a supportive opping style and your team sucks, you kind of just get smoked off and then you're left in like a 1v4. It's hard to get kills, but he's also just missing shots he shouldn't. He's also getting out-dueled in situations he shouldn't. Cirque's the real big question mark here, even more so than Automatic, who literally hasn't played CS for a while. You know, I believe more in Automatic than I do in Cirque at the moment. The other part that I don't believe in EG, I think in theory, they've got the firepower. I'm not sold on Stewie's calling. I'm really not. I think Stewie is an IGL. He can have good moments, but I also think any team with Stewie IGLing is never going to be particularly consistent. So I don't know. There's big question marks for this team, even outside of the obvious question mark, which is what is Automatic going to do?
Yes. What about you, dusT? What are the initial thoughts?
The best way I could sum up Evil Geniuses is that it's a massive parlay bet where you're hoping that everything that you've rolled the dice on comes to fruition, and you need all of them to happen for the team to be successful. And so what I mean by that is when it comes to having the stars that you need for this team to be competitive, you need Breeze and Cirque both back in form to be able to do it. And while I think there's a good chance that Breeze can return to form, because I think a lot of his dip in play probably came down to the environment that was going on in 2021, with Stanislaw being in and out of the team as the in-game leader and all the other moving parts and struggles that the team was dealing with. And I still feel like Breeze probably still can have some value as a big name rifler. Cirque's dip and play dates all the way back to like 2020, man. Like I feel like his struggles came way before some of the issues that the team was having, throughout the year last year. So I'm a little bit more concerned about his ability to return to form, because I think you do need both of them for this team to have the firepower it needs to be competitive. Then when it comes to someone like Rush, look, again, I'm willing to accept the fact that perhaps his dip in ability came down to, again, a similar situation at Complexity where the house was crumbling down. There's a bunch of moving parts. He's living in Europe full time for like a year and a half, basically, and things were just going to shit. And I realized at the same time that Rush isn't meant to be a star. He's meant to be more of the glue guy, more of a supportive element. But there is a certain level of fragging you must achieve in that role to not be a burden on your team. And I'm concerned whether he'll be able to do that or not, because he certainly was struggling Complexity the tail end of 2021 and really throughout the entire year. So you mix that in with what kind of Vu was hinting at with Stewie as an IGL, and then the fact that Automatic fucked off from CSGO for a year. So like, who knows what type of shape he's going to be in. I'm willing to admit that he could probably work the rust off fragging wise by spending time in the server. But again, what role is he going to play? Is he going to be able to help input wise with strategy like he used to do in the past with Stewie when they were a combo in Cloud9? Again, it's a massive parlay, Thorin. I think you have to have everything hit in order for this team to run.
Yeah, my problem is, on paper, this is where I think people get tricked. On paper, the lineup looks fire. It looks like, wow, give them some time, Yeah, true. I will say the IGL aspect's the obvious big question mark you'd have anyway with the players on paper. But if you said, looking at these names on paper, this team might not have enough firepower, you'd think, no way. But the problem is, you look at the actual names individually, like you guys are doing, mate, that firepower thing just falls apart. It's a mirage. Like, Breeze has been nowhere near the superstar player he used to be when we were on LAN before the pandemic shit happened. Like, he used to to genuinely, he was tracking to become like, maybe even like a fucking like top 7 or 8 player in the world. Like, he was fantastic at the time. I think if you watch his game, the eye test tells you the skill's still there. He's one of the few players I didn't give up on totally. You can see sometimes even as rounds where he frags out like that, like the skill is there. My concern is what you said about Vu is about Cirque. Dude, he's the one where, as much as I thought he was a fabulously skilled player before, I don't know what happened to this guy. Like, I'm amazed he made it into this team. Like, of all the names that Breeze is picking him as the ride or die. Like, mate, he's the one you let die. You just leave him by the side of the road. Like, he doesn't look like he has the game. Dude, he's an AWP. It's the most binary role in the game. This is why my boy Kenny S isn't in the fucking scene anymore. You're either really good or you wash out the scene immediately, because it's the gun that exposes you the hardest if you don't have it anymore. So to me, I don't know why Circa's in this team. Like, that's the gamble where they're almost just praying. It's like, Stanislav had like some fucking Magic the Gathering aura effect that just limited this guy's skill or something. What the fuck is that? Like, I don't buy that at all. Just has 2 years off just being whack and it just comes back really good.
Yeah, I mean, just to add a little caveat here, Thorin, I mean, I'm not claiming to have like a ton of insider information here or anything like that, but if I had to speculate and kind of based on some of the rumblings that I heard, I'm pretty sure that EG did target at least 2 other oppers and didn't get them. So, and I don't know how that would have changed things as far as like the overall makeup of the team. Like you mentioned earlier yourself, Thorin, they were trying to get NAF, and I think that NAF probably dipped out because I think he was expecting daps to stay or something like that, probably. And so I feel like EG did miss on a couple of targets they were trying to hit. And so I don't know if you want to give him leeway because of that, but I do think that this probably wasn't the the optimal 5 that they wanted.
Fair enough.
So I kind of want to throw that wrinkle in there because I don't know if they because I know like a lot of people are trying to get that Polish guy who's like NHL or something like that.
Yes,
I know OC was obviously on the market. Liquid was the one that wound up winning that one after trying to go after Munacy. So yeah, I think that might have some factored into it.
Sure. I will say, though, this is another factor I have. So another issue I have with this team is obviously the automatic move, because there's the one upside I give automatic, and this is actually quite a rare quality. Much like, in fact, you know what, forget the others, even the ones like Ethan who went over, his game was already going off the boil and he was moonlighting in that Valorant as far as I can tell, and then he just chose to go to Valorant. Here's what makes automatic quite unique, in my opinion. He actually didn't fall off his game. He just was in a team that wasn't very good. He didn't believe in the future and he went to Valorant. That's fine. As far as I can tell, even when his own motivation, like behind the scenes, he was one of the players I was trying to get to other teams in Flashpoint. Like, I got the vibe. He was a bit checked out on CS at the time anyway, man. I don't think he gave a fuck when it came online. So I will say in that scenario, it's not like he washed out the scene. He just wasn't good enough and now he's trying to come back. So I will give him the leeway. He could be good. The problem is, if he's only just come back, I'm not expecting it to be this month. I'd assume it's like 3 or 4 months when he has the time to get the hours in, the reps, he play a bunch of official games. You remember what the in and out, the flow of a game is like. So I would say, generally, I'm not too concerned about automatic, like long term. I assume he's coming back because he cares about the project. The Stewie IGL one, I can't handle, mate, because here's what I hate. I've told this story before in the past, but I always use different players, so I'll explain it again. There's a bias that pro players have to aggressive gamble style play because they consider that being a man. It's like, wow, you're trying to win the game. You're trying to take it in your own. It's all that fucking sports culture thing of like, he took the game by the scruff of the neck and he imposed his will upon it. Like, they think that's what it is. They genuinely, no joke, if you're like, the best example ever is my boy MSL. If you're just going to run like normal tactical Counter-Strike with like inputs that are obvious, you're looking for consistency, you apply this particular strat against this particular counter. If you do that, you have to be Glaive. That's the only person who's allowed to do that. Anyone who isn't Glaive, you're a pussy, you're a loser, you're a nerd who's just in the demos too much, you're boring, who would want to play stuck in your system? By the way, if anyone thinks a system is a shit style of play, go watch some Stewie 2K teams play. That's a team without a system. That's a guy who looks like he's in a POG, just calling POG strats. I'm sure they have things they work on in the game, but the way he's calling is clearly based on like what he's seen in the game in this second. Like the problem I have basically goes like this, Vu. To me, they're at best on a similar level. I'd even argue if you look historically, I think the MSL style actually wins out slightly over that. But people talk like Stewie 2K, some like world-class IGL dude, as though he's like cracked it because as an individual player outside of the IGL, well, he's had this fabulous career and all these great accomplishments and be part of the great teams. But I've just never seen it. Like when I've looked at when he, aside from at the beginning of Cloud9, when essentially he just had to be the IGL, which I'll give him mad props for, it's never been a tier 1 IGL. Like, I don't think he's ever come close to it. And I even got the vibe personally, the fact that he keeps sort of like doing it briefly in teams and then they put someone else, that's like a vote of no confidence from your own teammates there.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually, I think this is a huge NA problem. I see it in MDL as well. there's the IGL and there's the secondary caller. And secondary callers get this notion that they should be the IGL because a secondary caller, you get into a spot, you see a good read, you see the moment, and you go, here's what we should do. I know the exact plan. That's what we're going to do. And it works a lot because when you have the read, when you know what you're doing, when you have like a sole read on the round, you can make that call and it's going to be right most of the time. The problem is an IGL is someone that makes the call when you don't have a read. That's what you need an IGL for. When you don't know what the right play is, like you don't have just this clear idea of exactly what's happening, you make the right call. You make a solid, static, formulaic call that's going to win most of your rounds. Secondary IGLs can't do that, but because they get in their mind, oh, well, look, all these rounds I called, and we win all these rounds when I call it, they get in their mind, oh, I can be the IGL. It never fucking works. And I would guess that this is exactly what's happened with Stewie, where he's a good secondary IGL. He gets a lot of good reads, especially in the position he gets himself in. You can make some pretty solid reads in those spots. But then when you get to the main IGL position, it's just not the same. It's a totally different scenario. And on the rounds, you don't have those reads. And that's why I think when Stewie's been calling, I think his teams have typically been highly inconsistent when he's been calling. And I would put it down to that. When he doesn't have a read, he just can't make the right calls. And as he said, he can't put together like a system, which takes years to put together a system that works effectively.
Because the other thing to remember as well is, in this type of a squad, there's no backup plan. Like, who's the IGL if he isn't the IGL? Like, who? Like, no one. Like, maybe Automatic could maybe do it. Like, Rush? I don't know. Like, as far as I can tell, it's Stewie 2K or Boss, this team.
Yeah, it does seem like that's really all they have, right? I mean, like you said, Automatic, I think, did do some calling for Cloud9 at one point in time, and he shared responsibilities with Stewie in the past, so maybe they have a partnership they feel comfortable with, like sharing that responsibility. Rush is obviously a veteran, a guy who, has played a lot of supportive elements, so he probably has played under a lot of different in-game leaders throughout his career, and he's probably picked up a lot along the way, so he could probably be like a voice on the team, though I don't think you trust him to be like the shot caller. So yeah, it does seem like a lot of it will come onto Stewie's shoulders to be the true leader on this team, and this time he doesn't have some type of parachute to guide him if things start getting turbulent up there. With Fallen, at least he had like a veteran IGL that was with him on that team. And I've always had like these weird mixed like things kind of come my direction when it comes to Stewie 2K, because man, it's always the stuff you wouldn't expect as well. Because I heard whenever he was with Liquid, recently, and they were bouncing back and forth between him in-game leading and Fallen in-game leading, that apparently Stewie was the one that wanted more structure and like wanted more like defaults and like wanted more just like finite type of play, whereas Fallen wanted to be the looser caller, which is weird because Fallen had a history of the team that had mastered the default and like had all that stuff back in the day when like LG and SK and whatnot were like the masters of the game back in like 2016 or whatever. So yeah, it's one of those things where I've always like been odd because like Stewie as an individual has always been like kind of wild, kind of chaotic. He got that reputation of making all like the crazy pushes and making the big plays. And while he's certainly kind of refined that, he also is the guy that you kind of need to be that guy for you, because a lot of these times you don't have a guy who's willing to always be the entry and take initiative and like have some attitude and kind of give the team what they need. You kind of need a guy like that a little bit of a wild card. But if you're the wild card and you're also the IGL, things can get a lot more complicated and a lot more inconsistent, as Vu said. So I'm really curious. I think a lot of that will also come down to Malek's coaching on this team and what he's able to provide as a supportive factor. This really will give us like our last true test of Stewie as an IGL, because like you said, there is no one else to count upon.
Because actually, what one of you tagged on earlier, the assumption was this would be daps as the IGL. Because if people don't know, the story I heard, I think it might even have been daps who said it, was that it was implied they wanted him to come back to play in Evil Geniuses, not come back and coach when he came back from Valorant. And he was just sort of like, whoa, no, I'll start like coach, then we'll see. I've been off in a different game. What I don't get is this. For some reason, I'd love to know what it is, because to me, daps is the NA fucking MSL, by the way. He clearly knows how to lead up to a certain level very well. He constantly builds new teams. He gets new talent, crafts them, makes them good, and then what happens is the players get to that level like they do with MSL, and then people just sort of like go either to a better team or you lose faith in him. And somehow his players always lose faith in him, even though sometimes the level we're talking about was like 4th best team in the world or something, like not like some shitter level, like some very high level for an NA team. So what I don't get is this, even though in this team I have heard maybe he was just going to be the IGL, because to me it's the obvious one. Like, if you've got this group of players, just let that guy bloody be the in-game leader. If you all believe you're the players you are individually, you've got that taken care of. Let him structure the team. Because for some reason, I want to ask if you guys have any thoughts on this. For some reason, players seems to be on. It's not like it's like fans do this to any shit. It seems like the players don't really buy it. They buy into daps to a point, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I think with daps, like I think he's always been like a really good, just like basics IGL. Like he's really good at setting up the roles, developing newer talent, getting them into a system, having some well orchestrated defaults, like kind of playing that type of a game and just having that. But I think that sometimes people have critiqued that when it comes to like being more creative and like having like some set pieces to mix in. I mean, like he'll have like basic set pieces that you see every team use, but I feel like maybe people thought that he lacked a little bit of like creativity and maybe like a little bit of spontaneity to be able to kind of call some more pacing changes and be a little bit more dynamic as a caller, as opposed to just relying so heavily on defaults and things of that nature. And then the other thing is we obviously hit a point in Counter-Strike where almost all the good IGLs on top teams were also at least decent fraggers, and daps has always been probably one of the worst fragging IGLs in North America.
Yes.
It comes back down to what I said earlier about Rush on Evil Geniuses, where it's like, look, it's understandable if you're going to play the back seat, be more supportive, facilitate the team in other ways than fragging, but there is like a minimum threshold you have to hit, especially if you're like holding a certain spot on CT side or something where it's like, come on, man, like we need at least a little bit of something. And daps, unfortunately, has just been like the lowest on the pecking order in North America when it comes to fragging. I think his stats were even worse than like Sean Gares at one point when it came to fragging. He was like literally the lowest rated fragger of all the North American IGLs at a time. So even if you can swallow that for a while to get your team established and to get all the positive stat springs, I guess if you really want to break through eventually, like you kind of realize, okay, like we do need a little bit better fragging in this role, even if it means we're going to have to trade off some of the tactics. So yeah, I don't know if that's true or not. I've never been there to listen to him call, so I don't know if he struggles with the creativity and things of that nature, but that's just kind of the things I've kind of gleaned from people who have, been on his teams in the past or worked with them.
I think daps might kind of get exit cucked by Stanislaw, because I think most players probably look at the teams that daps has been on and then gone, oh, well, he can't be that good. Look how good Stanislaw does after daps leaves. And personally, I don't think Stanislaw is a very good IGL. I like maybe in the game he's a decent leader, but I think as an IGL for a team long term, I've always thought he's been pretty shit, and I think he's ridden off the back of daps being good. But I don't think players necessarily see that. I think they see a team that had the potential. They were going to be the best team in the world, and daps held them back, and then they brought in Stanislaw, and then they ignore that Stanislaw has a shelf life, spoiler, because he's not a great IGL. And they just go, oh, well, we want an IGL better than daps because daps clearly can't do it. And the fragging is definitely, it's another NA specific thing. I don't know. I guess you get this worldwide as well. But NA, everyone thinks they can IGL, and everyone thinks you can just replace your IGL and it's no big deal. So when the fragging isn't there, I mean, obviously fragging is how you win games, but I would have loved to see daps. I mean, with automatic on a roster, having daps there to bring Cirque and Breeze back to levels that they were at before, bring automatic back into the game, that would have made a lot of sense. This roster desperately needs someone like daps. And if it's not going to be daps, then it's got to be, I guess it has to be Malik, maybe.
Yeah, fair points. I would also say as well, I think it's an example of where you don't listen to players sometimes. Because you know what? I'll guarantee those players, right up until they get sick of the results, love playing with daps. He's calling all defaults, and all these big head players who think they all know how to individually play the best. They're just getting to do whatever the fuck they want. They go to their spots, they take their fights, they win out in the game, they're fragging out, but then what happens is the results aren't what they want. So I think what they do is they bring Stanislaw in, and his whole style is just like, I'm the fucking mega brain who does all the calls. In the short term, that's going to feel great, because it's like, wow, someone else is making the calls for us now. The problem is there's no shelf life to it, like you say. And also, if Stanislaw was this god IGL, why does he need daps to build the fucking team up first? Why does he never build the team up? Have you never noticed that? When he had his team, Complexity, they were going fucking nowhere fast. Everyone forgets about that one real quick, don't they? That he was the IGL of that team. That team was doing fucking nothing. They fluked one major run, and then they had nothing after that. It was one Swiss system. That's it, ever. So you give him the pieces, he'd never get to the point daps is at. So that's been one of the weirdest fucking, like, it's almost one of those like murder fucking suicide pact things just waiting to happen, isn't it? Like, what sort of fucked up toxic relationship do those two have in the NA scene for all those years? Like, I've never understood that one, but whatever, it is what it is. Let's move on, because here's the thing. We're going to save Team Liquid till later, because I know people have already, basically the Team Liquid moves are what people knew months ago, so everyone's previewed that. I want to do the complexity one now, dude, the former extra salt, because I have to say, I'll save my thoughts for a second, but I'll just preview it like this. I think people are really sleeping on this fucking roster, dude. Like, I feel like either people have only seen these players, some of them when they got the chance and didn't do as well in the bigger tier 1 team, or they don't know how good these players were in NA in past teams. Like, to me, if I know I can't have the players on EG and Team Liquid, this is a banger roster, Vu.
Oh, yeah. This is, I mean, I think a lot of what's happened is that Grim's stock has gone down a lot. I mean, if you see Grim in beginning of 2020, he was pulling off unreal numbers, like just unbelievable carrying before he joined Liquid. And then I guess, once he joined Liquid, things went down, and now his stock is at an all-time low. And I think people forget that he used to be this all-star talent that was kind of ousted from all of his good roles, all kind of his protection that he had in Triumph, into Liquid and kind of thrown into the fire. And then I think, I would guess as well, his confidence has been absolutely blasted being on Liquid, given, especially, I mean, if Stewie's going to come out before an event and say essentially Grim is shit, you can only imagine what's going on behind closed doors.
Put it this way, the stuff you heard, here's what's interesting about Team Liquid, I can tell you from the inside and some of my sources. The things you saw at the very end when the lineup was mega dead and like Fallen and Stewie having their incident, the Grim incident, these were things that already, as I heard, when were going on in the months prior, it's just they didn't leak. So I heard on the Grim topic, by the way, people genuinely were just like essentially sort of flaming this guy in practice and sort of, or even amongst each other, sort of being like, this guy isn't any fucking good. Which, listen, you're going to find out that your teammates think that, for fuck's sake.
Look, if that's what he's saying publicly, think about what's happened on internally, guys. Like, use your brains. Like, imagine how much worse it was, like, behind closed doors, if that's what's getting out to the public in interviews and vlogs and things of that nature. I heard it was pretty bad. That's all I'm going to say.
So anyway, for what we said?
Yeah. I think Grim's, if he came from Triumph, you'd probably be putting him in all of the best roles, and you'd be trying to put him as the carry. Coming from Liquid, I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case. The biggest question mark I have with this roster is actually Junior, which seems a little bit odd, because if you just look at his stats, he almost seems like he's nearly as good as OC. But then if you look at his actual play, and if you look deeper into his stats, I mean, he really falls off a cliff against top 10, top 5 teams. When teams start to be good, he falls off. And if you watch his gameplay, he misses a lot of shots. He actually misses quite a few. And when he's playing worse teams, they're not going to punish him for that. When he's playing better teams, he misses a shot. He might re-peek into the angle to take the shot again. He's just going to get blasted, or he's just going to get blasted as soon as he misses the shot in the first place. And he's also got this, I mean, I assume that this can be kind of grilled out of him, but he's also got a tendency to make the same play a lot, like to the point that a good team anti-stratting is going to be able to see that coming and deal with it. So Junior is actually by far the biggest question mark I have on this roster, despite the fact that, I mean, I think most people looking at the roster are going to see Junior as a big plus.
What do you think, dusT?
Yeah, I mean, I think that similar to like Grimstock plummeting whenever he went over to Team Liquid, I think the same thing kind of happened to Junior when he tried to do the whole Furia thing, right? I mean, I think that obviously he got his first taste of like playing against international competition on a team where he was with a bunch of, I mean, that's the wildest one, I think, maybe in CSGO history of like, I know we had like, Stewie and Tarek join together on Made in Brazil, but Junior basically, who had no established, presence inside tier 1 NACS, even all of a sudden shows up to Furia with 4 Brazilians by himself. Like, that must have been wild. So I think his, stock unfortunately plummeted due to that whole situation. Seemed like he came back to like Bad News Bears and was playing pretty good within North America. But like you said, I do think we're going to have to see if he can kind of rise back to those levels that made him attractive when he was on Triumph alongside Grim. At least he'll be familiar getting to play with Grim again as well. So that's always nice. I think the other person you have to point to on this team is actually Fang, because I know that he was a guy that some other teams were actually looking at. Mike, maybe a Liquid or EOGenesis, for example. He's, younger guy, been fragging really, really well with Extra Salt. So it seems like he definitely has some talent to him. I've heard that maybe he still needs to kind of work on some of the other aspects of like his mental game and attitude and things of that nature. Again, I don't know how accurate that is. It's just what I speculate, that maybe he needs to kind of calm down a bit. But I think that he at least has the talent. And so, yeah, but that and the fact that Floppy, comes back from Valorant, and so you're kind of worried, is he going to have it still? What's he going to be thinking? He was the one guy that never really committed all the way to Valorant, though. I feel like of all the transfers that kind of happened, it's like he really did just do it because he had no choice.
It was false at the time.
Yeah, it did seem like it wasn't like something he really wanted to do, like some of the other guys like really wanted to give it a chance. It seemed like he just kind of did it because it's like, oh, I guess that's what I have to do to still have a career. And so now that he's found an opportunity to come back to Counter-Strike, the game he never wanted to leave, he's been looking like he's hit the ground running pretty well. So I mean, yeah, this team definitely has a lot of firepower. I actually would have been curious to see how daps would have done with this team, if I'm just being 100% honest. So that's no shot against JT. I'm just kind of curious, like, how that could have worked out. But JT, in his own credit, has been like a pretty serviceable IGL throughout his career with ATK and Bravado and so on and so forth. The South South African stuff. So we'll see. I think that there's definitely some hope for this team for sure. They definitely have, like you said, all the firepower that you could want, outside of EG and Liquid.
Yeah, if people don't know, the other rumour was this is the team daps goes to, and he just has all these young stud talents. And then, by the way, that would obviously be an incredible prospect. Think of all the players he's brought up over the years. Like, the joke is, in this team, they've got the opposite problem you would expect from a tier 2 NA team. They have 4 players who are supposed to be the star player if you look at their careers. And the other one's JT and IGL, who's like a fucking execute IGL. So, listen, God bless him. He's got a fucking hard challenge. The upside is this. If he figures it out, this team can be way better, like I said, than the names on paper if you don't know them. But the downside is, I don't know how you figure all these roles out and who's going to fit where, etc. So, that's the tough part. Because if people don't get it, if we're assuming that NA, in terms of the recent performances of teams, generally you would have considered them like top of tier 2. This is a tier 2 super team. Literally every one of these players was a star. Floppy was the star of JT's Cloud9. Grim was the star of Triumph. Junior was also a Triumph as well, right? I think it was Triumph after fucking Grim left was when he kind of had his star period where he was carrying, and then Fang obviously was in the extra salt team. He was like the best player there. So to me, if you can get it right, I'm not sure where everyone fits in the mix here, but if you can get it right, the actual firepower could be very underrated on this squad, in my opinion. So I actually listen. I thought JT did a pretty good job when I watched him at Cloud9. His problem is he's another one in the vein of daps who's not a very good individual player for IGL. But then again, I'll tell you what: if you stack this much skill, if you make it work, this is the rare example of a team you can probably survive with an IGL like that.
I think the biggest clash is going to be Grim and Fang. Like, I think that Floppy's always been kind of a guy that can kind of take more passive rifling roles, kind of, put him off by himself into a default and let him kind of be that kind of guy and let him facilitate that way. And I feel like Grim is the kind of guy you want more at the forefront. You want him as like more of your trade fragger, let him be able to flex some of the stuff he did on Triumph. But I also feel like it's kind of like where Fang plays some of his best Counter-Strike. So that is where I think the biggest rub might be, is like trying to figure out how to balance Grim and Fang to make the roles work on this team. But if they can, like you said, definitely have the skill to make some noise.
Yeah, I think actually looking at their games so far, the rounds where Grim goes first seems to be the rounds where Complexity is having by far their most success. When Grim's going at the back, it seems like things are kind of falling apart at the front. So I'd love to see Grim as like a first or second in, because he's getting, mechanically Grim is insanely talented. And if that means Fang takes a hit, I'd be fine with that.
So I also will add as well, if we're going with the angle that, like, look, this isn't supposed to on paper be a team that's immediately top 10 and all that jazz. It's kind of taken a min-max flyer at the idea of having an NA team, but also be like, a dark horse, be vaguely relevant. It's a pretty well put together squad, I've got to say. Whoever put this together, they did a pretty good job. And if they indeed had have landed daps, I would even have said, probably I would have made some bold predictions like they're better than one, maybe EG. I think on paper, if they've had daps, maybe they would be better than EG. I think the firepower's there for a start. Right, what about this then? We'll go to the Team Liquid lineup. Right, the problem with the Team Liquid lineup, I teased this earlier, is there's no surprises there. Like, basically, these are the players that you heard in all the rumours months and months and months ago, funnily enough, since the major, that was going to happen. The first thing you heard was ochs was going to join, and then you heard OC's the one they're targeting, and then obviously maybe Naf left, maybe he stayed. No one knew on that one. That's why there was that weird rumour that Vinny joins, but instead he's off having a last dance into a fucking sewer somewhere, never to be seen again, because that's a dog shit project, isn't it? So what about this actual lineup for Team Liquid? So obviously they kept Khalij and Naf. Back comes Nitro, who himself was off on a Valorant adventure. They bring in OC, who obviously was funnily enough, in the team with JT and Floppy, the Cloud9 that you maybe vaguely liked at one point before, the one you all hated and basically run out of the industry. And then the last player, of course, is... This makes no sense whatsoever. It's a complete non sequitur. You're going to think there's like a pause in the VOD. It's ochs, of course, from the French scene, who's only ever played in French language speaking teams. So listen, it was all making a lot of sense. It was coherent lineup until that last one. So dusT, I'll throw it to you first. What are you actually, now that we know these are the real moves, and there's no, like, we did hear, I will say, for Team Liquid, apparently they really were, these weren't even their first names. They really were going for Monacy, and I heard they were going after some CIS play. Like, apparently they really were like out there trying to get some of the big names. Maybe Alexi B was going to go their team. I've heard they really were in the mix. It's just unfortunate at the end they end up with the names everyone heard about. So what do you think of the actual squad they've got?
I know for a fact they also went for Alexi B and Rops. I know that was like two of the names that they were trying to get.
Yes, another one.
Monacy was obviously one that they talked to. That MHL Polish guy, I think, was another one that they talked to about opping. But I do think OC actually was one of their top choices and has been for quite a long time. It's just that extra salt will just never sell. for ages. And that's been dating back for a long ways now. Like they've been having OC on the radar for a while. There's a lot of different angles we can take on Team Liquid, but I'll just go with the positives first, and then we can kind of get through some of the nitty-gritty question marks. But the positives are they retain Naf and Elige. That's like check number one that you had to do, I feel like. I mean, those two complement each other so well when it comes to the roles that they play, with the consistent fragging that they bring to the table, with just like the experience. Like they are just cream of the crop North American players right now, and they haven't lost a beat in that regard. So I think maintaining those two is huge. Making sure that you kept Naf and look, he was actually going to be out the door. That's huge because, again, he was one of the most consistent players on the team. So I got to give him huge props for that. And then I got to give him huge props for finally getting OC, because that is the player to take a chance on, in my opinion. If there was ever another NA player to take a chance on after Grim, it was OC. Like, this guy has done virtually everything that he can do to try to prove that he deserves a chance on a team like Liquid to play against the best of the best and see if he can carry that form over against the elite teams of the world. And Liquid has not had a true primary opper in forever. You know, like they've did musical chairs with the op between Naf, Stewie, and Nitro for a while. Then they bring in Fallen, but he's not that impactful primary op that you really want, to be honest with you, not these days. And so they finally get that. And so those are huge positives. And then also, I think, will assist this Nitro transition back, because Nitro won't have to do that. He won't even have to think about the op anymore. He can just focus on trying to be a rifler that sets up a Legion now, and then just try to get back in the groove of being an IGL, which we can talk about that a little bit later. But I did just want to at least knock that. Those are massive positives. And when you compare that against a team like Evil Geniuses, all their positives are like gambles you hope pay off. Like, the positives that Liquid have are guaranteed to you. Like, unless somehow Naf and Elige fall off a cliff, like, they're going to be top level players. So at least they were able to like really solidify that portion while they're trying to figure out if they can get Nitro back to speed.
I mean, I'm excited for Liquid to never beat Astralis again. But otherwise, I specifically remember mentioning OC to Liquid to Thorin in some other show at some point. He's like, why do you hate Liquid so much? Why do you want to see them lose? I think OC is absolutely, I mean, statistically, I think he's like somewhat on par with Junior, but I think he's way more promising than Junior. I think he's gonna be the next good NA opper. I don't see too much of a downside to picking up OC. I think teams have wanted him for a while. Nitro as an IGL, I've never rated him that highly, but he's always been, pretty solid. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I've just thought that, if a team wants to be the best team in the world without just fragging ridiculously hard, I'm not sure Nitro's the guy, but I don't think he's going to be a massive letdown in any way, shape, or form. The biggest thing, Thorin mentioned it. It's the fucking Shox pickup. It seems like the life of a top European player is like, play in Europe, get to the HLTV top 10, start losing, start falling off a cliff, and then eventually nobody in Europe wants you, and you get picked up by an NA team for more than you've ever been paid in your entire life. And I don't know if that's exactly what happened with Shox here. I'm sure there's some French team that would pick him up, but it does seem weird, and I think Shox is probably getting paid more than he's been paid in France. And I don't know, I hope that it's not him phoning it in. That's the question mark. The only real question mark I have on this roster that's like a big question mark.
The thing is, though, I'll actually, because obviously we'll go into some of the negatives now, dusT. One thing I'll say is I'll spin it the other way, though. That's why I was so incredibly underwhelmed by the Stewie/Fallen IGL period. Because the joke is, there's even other top 10 teams in the world don't have two consistent stars like Elige and Naf, who, as you say, by the way, sadly, I said this to actually fucking Twists when he used to play with Elige. I told him, if you play it right, mate, you never stop playing with this guy your whole career. You just play like 10 years together. If you do it right, you have total role non-overlap, and you can genuinely be both stars coexisting, and you just move the other pieces around. It turned out it has to be Naf and Elige instead, but the same applies. There is no role overlap between them. They are both really good at exactly what they want to do. They're consistent, so they don't really drop off. So if you have two pieces like that, it's like, what are you fucking up as an IGL that you can't make a competent team out of that? Like, mate, if you're a good IGL, spoiler, there's 3 of the 5 positions done. So what it tells me is none of those guys really had like the right IGL style to lead that team, or maybe they didn't get what these players are about. One thing actually I thought I'd throw out there to you guys, because you're from the NA scene, is the NA scene also for me has a weird vibe about it where it feels like people don't think in terms of roles, mate. It feels like the team that they just made in EG now, the reason it reminds me of the Cloud9 team is because that's also another team where you just threw together a bunch of good players and you were like, we'll figure it out. It's like, what? Like, dude, if I think of a sports approach, like, you know, if I had my team now, so I've got Naf, I've got Lit, I'm just trying to think, like, who would fit with this, who would complement what they do, or what type of an AWP. I don't think they do that in these teams. I think they go for the best player available, and then, like they do with Grim, and then after the fact, they go, does he actually fit on our team? I don't know, put him there, I guess. Like, I get the vibe. So in this team as well, I still don't really know if this was like I don't imagine this was like one of those 70s movies where they're trying to catch the mafia and they had all the names on the board with arrows connecting them. Like, I don't think they had a coherent plan. I think they just went for a bunch of names that we're talking about. They had a short list, and at the end now, they're going to go, right, I guess Shock's, I don't know, you're some sort of fucked up support player with a bit of entry, maybe. OC, listen, you are the AWPer, but even so, you're not getting all the resources that we have got Legion, Naf on this team. Nitro, just figure it out. Like, you know what I mean? Like, is this really a project they believe is going to be number one? That's what I'd love to know.
Yes, and I would actually disagree with you a little bit, Thorin. I think they did have the roles set up on this team. I think that when they didn't get Rops, they went for Shocks because that's all that they could really get that would kind of maybe be able to fit in a position like that. And I think that the roles will kind of shake down just fine on this team. I think you're going to have Nitro and Elise probably be your intra rifling combo, just like we had back in the old days where Nitro's going to go first. He's going to facilitate Elise and basically be the man to make sure that Elise can be a star trade fragger. I think you're going to have Naf and Shocks playing the solo positions on T side. They're probably going to have to play a little bit of like trading on who's going to be like more of the anchors and rotators on the CT side and stuff like that. That might be like the harder transition to try to figure out between Naf and Shock. So I think on T sides, you're probably just gonna have to figure out like which end of the map you want to stick each player on and have that happen. And then O's is going to be the operator with the pack with the Legion Nitro. So I think that on paper, it actually works out just fine to me. I think the EG example is a little bit more what you're talking about, where it's like, I don't really know exactly what is going to be done on this team as far as like who's going to be entering with Stewie and who's going to be more of a supportive element. You can kind of go a bunch of different ways with that. But no, I actually think that Liquid, when they were targeting players, I think they did target the roles that they wanted. I think they knew that they were going to have Nitro and Elise entry. I think that they were trying to figure out like who's a good solo rifler that we can get. So Rops was obviously one of those targets, and they didn't get it. Then they knew that they needed a really powerful opera, so they tried to go after like a Munacy or something. They didn't get that, but they had OC and NA, who was the most promising prospect that we had in the region to be that guy. So I actually really like, Liquid's game planning as far as her roster building. I think the only real concern for me is how is Shock's going to mesh with the rest of this team on like a philosophy level on how to play the game. Because I think Liquid is trusting Shocks to be the second voice in this team next to Nitro. I'm sure Elise will have some say, but Naf's a more quiet guy. He's not really going to probably ask for too much.
He's definitely in that secondary calling wheelhouse.
Yeah, exactly. So how does that work? Yeah. How does the Adren Nitro brain trust that has been the leadership backbone on this team in the past, how does that mesh with what Shocks wants to do? And is that going to plan out? Because I think that's going to be the biggest trouble point for this team, the biggest hump they have to get over. Because look, man, Thorin, like, even though we know Shock's not in his prime, he's still going to have a couple of pop-off moments. He's still going to have a couple of powerful clutches. He's still a serviceable enough fragger to like play the role that they're going to probably put him in on T sides. But what I want to know is, are they going to be able to mesh on philosophy? Like, that's going to be the biggest one for me. And like Vu said, is he just phoning it in? Or is he going to give it the same effort and like the same, focus that you would hope that he would?
I'll push back on that a little bit, because here's what I'll say, though. That's why I don't believe in this team. Unlike the EG one, on paper, I actually think the Team Liquid line looks all right. Like, like you're saying, you could see ways it could work. My problem is this. There's no actual true leadership in this team. Like, Nitro's a pretty quiet IGL. He's more of the guy who's like everyone's friend, right? Adren is definitely not a drill sergeant in any way whatsoever. Elise is famously passive-aggressive. Like, he sort of wants things his way, but doesn't want to be the leader who does it. So that isn't leadership. Naf is probably someone who doesn't even attempt leadership approaches. And then OC is a brand new guy, and spoiler, if you've never met him, by the way, OC is like, there's two types of West Coast Asian American immigrant I've noticed. They're either the one who really is like in the fucking streets and they've got that crazy, it's like Fast and the Furious basically, or there's the type that's OC as far as I can tell, which is he's the fucking good boy. I'll guarantee he was on the fucking honor roll, homework done every night, all that. Then he's in the DM server practicing for 1 hour, then he has his scrims coming up. He just seems like a guy who's all by the boy. As a result, if you know him, he's not like a super outgoing guy who's trash talking. So I look at this team and I'm like, who's the player who's going to go like, give me this now. Or who's the IGL, by the way, who goes, we're going to win this game? Or who's the figure, who's the captain who goes, we're going to put it all together? I've seen that as what they're lacking in this team. I think they've got good players, but I don't think they've got a cohesive element. And I think, by the way, that's where the Shocks one worries me. I agree with you, dusT. If this was a game like League of Legends where it's not about comms, etc., you just play the game out and you have minimal calls, Shocks would be fine. The problem with this is, not only has Shocks already ever played in teams that spoke French as their main language, he is a infamously, notoriously emotional character. Who, as a result, by the way, this is the part people don't get. It's why when those French teams stop being number 1, they don't go to number 4. They go to like number 11, even though it's the same players. Because when they implode emotionally, they all just go completely off the reservation. Like, people just lose their shit. People are in a slump. People are like, they might look at they're holding it together, but sometimes behind closed doors, they're falling apart, guys. People are climbing the walls. That's why they always have to do those massive, like, they don't just do like one player change. They like tear the whole scene in half and like remake new combos. Because it's like a bad marriage. At that point, you have to just get the fuck out. Like, you're going to kill each other if you stay. So my vibe there is like, if Shocks doesn't fuck with it the first month's in, this project's going to be in a lot of trouble because there's nobody coming in who's got the hand on the shoulder. Who's going to? I feel like this has to just hit the ground running, boys.
No, I think that's fair.
I always thought that. I always thought this is one of the problems they had when they picked up Moses. I feel like when they had Nitro, they had a team that could have used Moses, and then they dropped Nitro and picked up Moses, which is a team that could have used the Dren, and they picked up Fallen, who, despite being in a professional Brazilian team, apparently needed months for Team Liquid to show him the new way the meta's developed, which I always thought was just mind-blowing that he's been playing in a professional team, but there's so much that has changed. I could never understand like what was fucking going on, and then it all goes back to how he called out Semler for saying they were phoning it in when they were definitely phoning it in.
Yes.
But regardless, I do think NA, by the way, I think NA operates exactly how you said, Thorin. However, the fact that Vinny was even on the table, I think suggests that Liquid were in their way trying to build roles that did make sense. I don't really agree that Shocks is the role. It does make sense. Like, I don't think that. I think that could really, really go so poorly. Exactly the way you guys are describing. Like, he's a player that I think Shocks in a Liege, if things don't go perfectly very quickly, could be a dynamic that just blows the team up.
My dream was Valde, by the way. That's who I wish they would have guys for fifth. Like, the fact that EG were kind of apparently looking at him, I was like, I tried. I actually did try. Like, I spoke to people I knew. I was like, bro, y'all really should take a look at Valde.
The problem is supposedly he was just too expensive at the end, and like he
I don't even think Liquid wanted Valde. I think Liquid went after Alexa B over on OG, but they didn't ever look at Valde for whatever reason. Anyway, that was my dream. It didn't happen. Oh well. Rops obviously would have been amazing just because of the talent, but I think Valde could have been like a cool second voice and a good supportive element. But I tend to agree with kind of your take, Thorin, as far as leadership. Look, I do think, and people can argue with me if they want on this, so we can have that debate. I do think, tactically speaking, the Nitro Adren combo will be good enough for this team. I think that they will be able to figure out roles, defaults, have some set pieces, maybe innovate some new like flashes or something, and like have some good plays. Like, I think that they're going to be strategically. I do think you're right though on like the leader of men aspect of the team, where they've been reliant upon like sports psychologists admittedly in the past, and so that is where things could really crumble, right? Like, if they fall into the same old issues they did in the past, where they couldn't close out a game, or they run across a group of players they keep losing to, and then it happens to them again, the curse continues. Like, those are some trouble areas that I think the team didn't really solve with the moves that they made. I will say, on a quick side note, from watching OC's like streams and stuff, he does seem like the kind of opera that kind of calls for plays at times. Like, hey, can you flash me here? Hey, can you do this? So he does seem a little bit proactive with his communication. So that gives me a little bit of hope, but I don't know if that will be facilitated within this team or if it'll get lost in all the noise of other people or how that'll pay out.
It's also probably worth pointing out, I know Stewie2K himself has alluded to this. I don't know how explicit he was publicly, but I know behind the scenes this was the case. I think that's actually what he hated about Team Liquid as well, was the vibe that it was a bunch of quiet guys just sat around losing the game, and he's just sort of going like, that's it. We're just going to lose and then just go home. Like, what the fuck's the point of this? But the problem with that is, everyone who's been a manager or a coach will understand this. You can't just be the guy screaming all the time, because eventually they just tune you out. They go, he's just always the guy who does like that. It's why, famously, there's a famous story I once told. some would say mistakenly, but whatever, who's still here, motherfucker, about Taz from Virtus Pro, where I told the story that some of his teammates, we're talking even going back into 1.6, used to make fun of him privately because they would nickname him the General, because every fucking big semi-final, he just came in with the Any Given Sunday speech. Not literally that, but like his version of it. And every time it would be the big... And the problem is he'd done it every... Like, you know, he'd do like 5 tournaments in a row, a slightly different version, but, you know, and what he didn't get was, that's amazing when you do it sparingly. If you do it 3 or 4 times in your career, that could be the most epic moment ever. But if you do it loads of times, you just become the guy who gives a speech, which doesn't seem that authentic because you do it every time and you do it every single game. So guess what? That becomes your equivalent of the guy who just sits in his locker quietly. Like, it doesn't have any impact anymore. So to me, that's where I see them struggling as a squad, because I think Stuart2K tried to do that, but first of all, you can't have one guy do it to a whole squad. And then also, quite frankly, as I think you can see from the dynamic, I don't think they were receptive to it. I think, like, when they were winning, here's the big problem. That team will never survive the fact that they won so much when they first made the Stuart2K lineup, because when you win constantly, you don't even know there are problems at that point in time. Like, you know, the most depressing thing ever about that team, Vu, I've told this story before. They all told me before the major was over that they weren't going to win the major. As in, I was telling them, no, but you are. Like, you have to understand, when you play Astralis now, you're going to beat them. Like, you've got better map pool than me. Like, they're bad at this point of the game. Zipnix is busted. You're going to win some clutch. Like, they were the ones going, we're not, though. You have to understand, like, scrims were really bad. And you know what? I don't think the team's in the right mental place. I was going like, dude, if I'm the one telling you, like, what the fuck is this bullshit? Like, but the problem is that just tells you what that team was like at its core. Like, it was almost like they had to have, like, perfect confidence. Otherwise, they just crumbled completely. Because here's my problem. Now that we've done those 3 big lineups, we'll maybe do a little bit on the Furia one in a second. The problem I have is this, mate. In terms of who should have had the pull to make you come to their team, it should have been Team Liquid. They've got Naf and Elige, dude. They're still top-ranked players now. They've got all the money in the world in Team Liquid if it's the right player and it's worth spending on. They have all this history going back as top team, always relevant to major. Like, the idea that you can't put a better lineup than this, it's like, fucking hell, guys. Because I have to say, among these 3 lineups, bearing in mind I'm giving the extra salt one a break in the fact that they're like a bunch of them inexperienced, I don't think any of these lineups is going to the top 5 of the world, boys. Like, these just look like, you know, even the Team Liquid one, that just looks like it can make the top 10. Like, I don't really unfortunately, I don't see a very bright future at the moment.
Yeah, it's not money. I can tell you that when it comes to the Liquid side of things, attracting people. I really do think for some weird reason, and I mean, to be fair, COVID's made this more complicated. Europeans just don't want to move to North America long term. Yes. It just doesn't happen. And so unless you're willing to kind of like base your whole team in Europe, which is what Complexity tried to do there for quite some time with their international lineup, and what EG apparently is kind of going to do, it seems like they're going to at least have an extended boot camp in Europe with a lot of their players. It just seems like you can't get them. Like, basically, if you're a really talented European player, and you're thinking about going the international route, which is essentially what Liquid would be for you if you're going to make that move, you'd rather just go to like FaZe or like Mouse Sports or like, hell, even Vitality's multinational now. So it's just like you have your options at home where you don't really have to move and make that big transport. I think that is just a constant struggle that Liquid runs across when they're trying to recruit. And that's just unfortunately never going to go away. So, yeah, I don't know.
I think CS is kind of running into the League of Legends situation where European players know that going to NA is like a waste of time unless you just want the money. And so they are, I mean, and then you just don't have the tier 2 scene in NA that's nearly as good as it should be. I mean, I remember Smooya leaving and going, yeah, NA players, they just don't throw fucking flashbangs. They don't throw flashes. And that's why Smooya dominated everyone to a ridiculous degree, because he was a great opper that didn't miss and they didn't flash him off of angles. And that's why you see, I think Junior might be one of the players to bring back Complexity, one of the players that, you know, he misses a decent amount of shots, but he still gets ridiculously high rating because, well, he can re-peek into it, and players aren't that good, and players don't throw flashes to actually make his shots hard. So NA doesn't have the tier 2 pipeline. They don't have the ability, even with bags of money to throw at people, to bring in European talent. It's a bit concerning, especially because a lot of these teams, I think, you know, like a lot of NA players are a little bit daunted at the idea of spending so much time in Europe for events. I'm not sure the situation is going to be this year, at least, but I know that's why a lot of players wanted to go to Valorant. And I think a lot of the players that went to Valorant, by the way, I don't even think they put 100% into Valorant. You know, I've heard a lot of players were just kind of phoning it in Valorant because they didn't want to go live in Europe. Europeans don't want to play with North Americans. We're in a pretty shit spot.
Well, the joke is, as was the case, 6-7 years ago when NA was also still in a spot where they hadn't got the true elite teams, you just let the Brazilians do it. So now we can talk about a good roster, which is obviously Furia. And the reason why I bring this up at the end, by the way, is this is how you know that the experiment when Henny left Furia basically ruined that team in people's eyes. Most people, even at the major, were like, this team can't possibly do anything. I was like, dude, they still have like Yuri, Kovacevicd, like they have some banger players. What are you talking about? Yeah, they're obviously not the team they were when they had fucking Henny, but they still had like pieces that were good. And to me, this is the most obvious slam dunk move of all the Brazilian players and teams right now. It immediately fills so many of their problems. I think you get a team that could have 3-star players with 0 role overlap. Like, I think this is a mad slept on lineup. Like, it's not perfect, but mate, this team, the joke is, this team could be better than all the NA lineups I was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think kind of how we talked about how like Naf and Elige are like such a great combo. They have like complementary roles and they're both so consistent performers. That is also Yuri and Kovacevicd. Like they have the exact same type of relationship where it comes to like very clearly Yuri's like the more like aggressive one of the two. Kovacevicd's like more of the laid back one of the two. They both consistently perform very well. They've both taken turns kind of being like the main star of the team. And so that cornerstone, maintaining those two players, they're some of the most promising Brazilian players that we have in the scene and have been for quite some time. And yeah, like you said, picking up Saf or Safi or however you pronounce it, I think it's Safi. Yeah, he was clearly the next opping prospect, to bring into this team and take over that role. I mean, he was ludicrous on Pain. And, it was one of those things where it's like, well, yeah, he's ludicrous in his region, but, can he do it at an international level? And I mean, to an extent, he did. When he went to the major, he was balling on people. So, like, he passed his first test. Let's put it that way. We don't know if he can do it consistently over time against the elite of the elite. But the one time he did get tested against like Astralis and some of these other teams, guess what? He did deliver. So that's good enough to probably go ahead and take the chance on him. So I think that's great. I think the two problems that I still worry a little bit with Furia is I'm not sold on the drop guy as their fifth. Like, I don't really know too much about him. I know he came from like their academy team. He doesn't seem to have that much experience compared to the rest of the lineup. He doesn't have like that long pedigree of success where it's like, oh, that guy's doing really well, I should go and take a chance on him. Like, it doesn't seem like he had that. So I'm kind of curious like how he fits in longer term, because I know that they were kind of rotating through multiple different players for that spot across. Like, I think they had like a couple other different players kind of play in that same kind of position for a bit. So I'm curious about that. And then the other thing is like Art's figured out by now, right? Like, it used to be that his wild, crazy, aggressive playmaking is something that would really kind of throw teams for a loop, but people know it's coming now and people have figured out ways to handle that. And so I need to see how he's going to evolve as a player and as a leader. I think it's great that you have a guy like that that's willing to go in first and kind of willing to be fearless and kind of set up Yuri and Kovacevicd and these other players. That's great. You do need that, but it needs to be in a more controlled way. I feel like his antics and how far he pushes the envelope, it probably needs to be reined back in a bit. I think they need to kind of get a little bit more steady. Like, they need to evolve a little bit. So that's the other thing I'm going to be looking at.
Yeah, I think one of the problems with the Art situation, I think if you look at like a heat map of them on certain maps, Mirage is one I looked at a while back, where a lot of teams would never hit the same speed timing that Art would hit, but Art would hit it way too often to the point that you could just time nades on top of them. You could time spams on their timings because they would always be trying to hit this peak timing. When Furia came into the scene, I thought that most teams would pick that up, that hitting these timings that no other team is hitting is incredibly tough to deal with. And for example, like leaving Murder Hole open on Mirage, most teams, you have an internal timing of when someone might flank in a market, and Art's just going to beat that timing. For some reason, other teams didn't pick that up and like add it to their repertoire to quite the extent I would have thought, but Furia hit it a little bit too often. So I do agree. I think they need to adjust something there. As far as safe goes, I mean, I'm about as sold on safe as I could be for someone that's not yet played at like a top level. And I'm just going to echo exactly what dusT said. I'm not sold on drop either. I'm not sure how they're going to, replace the Vinny's roles with drop. I suppose that's the idea. I'm not sure I'm not sold on it.
That's the one part I don't get, dude, is to me, that was the move. You just keep Vinny and you let the drop guy go, and then you've just completed the fucking Brazilian Exodia at that point in time. That's exactly all the roles are nailed. In fact, here's the one good thing that did come from the fact that they didn't change out the drop guy. At least, and I'm so glad this didn't happen, at least nobody from the MIBR core went to their team. Because that's the other thing I wanted to keep I want to keep them insulated away, because if people don't know, the moment an OG player joins your team, who might even still be good at the game, the second they bring that attitude of like, we can phone this one in or whatever, we didn't win it. Like, as soon as they show they aren't like hungry for it, it infects the whole team. You'll kill it, especially if there's someone you look up to. It's a legendary player. You think you're going to learn from him. Like, that can kill the confidence of a team so badly. Like, you can just crush them flat. It's not a coincidence that people don't know that when FNX left MIBR, SKLG, everyone talks like he just retired. No, he went to Immortals for a few months and even they fucking benched him because it was exactly what I'm talking about. Like, you bring him thinking he's going to teach you, and if anything, he just brings you all fucking down. You kick him and they went the bloody major final, if people don't remember. Like, they were actually a better team without FNX. That was the joke, wasn't it? So to me, like I agree, I don't really get the last one on that one. I assume even Brazilians must do the stupid thing of like, but Drop is more skilled than Vinny. It's like, what role's he playing, you moron? Like, in this scenario, that the joke is like, I could even accept that, dusT. If the real move in Team Liquid was like Vinny for Grim, then maybe he even does the things you thought Grim was going to do but couldn't do on your team. Like, that at least makes sense. But yeah, I don't really get the fifth one on this one. So that's just my logic is, if they really can get, like I said, no overlap, if you can get Safe to play like he did in Pain with what you're in Caserata do already, mate, that's already a banging threesome. Yeah. Those 3 stars, mate, I'm not joking, I'll put them against anyone in the world. Like, even Na'Vi's, like, they're not going to be as good as Na'Vi's, but they're only just behind. What, you think they can't go head to head with Gambit, Hero? Of course they fucking can. They'll be right in the game. So to me, this is a team where as long as, they don't get too sequestered in NA, as long as they can come to all the European tournaments, get the fucking reps in. Like this, for example, this is another team you look for as dark horse for next major if they do well.
No, I think that's fair enough. I think, like, I don't know, like a Wet Dream would be like a Bolts or something like that on this team instead of Drop maybe. But I don't know enough about like the up and coming Brazilian scene to like say that this very clearly should have been the guy that you got instead of Drop. Like, I don't know if like one of the God Sent players would have made sense or something like that. But yeah, I think like you said, there's already enough talent here to where if those 3 can stay on top, and if Art can just kind of evolve a little bit on what the roles he plays and how he calls, yeah, this team's going to be very dangerous. Like, I definitely think they're destined to be minimum top 10 and maybe challenge top 5 here and there.
I've got a quick aside, actually. I've got one last topic we'll do and then we'll finish the episode. Here's what I'm going to do, right? It's a bit of an abstract thought, so I want to see where you two go with it. Because I look over the last few years, right? Back in the day, I was always one of those people constantly it was always other people engaging me in it, mate. I never engage in it. They always engage me when I say the dreaded word support. They go, no such thing. It's not a role. Why are you trying to force it as a role? Right? And what I've always said is, it's not a role, you're right. It's not a position on the map and it's not a set role. But it is a set of responsibilities and a mindset of how you play the game. That's how I describe support. And so I always said it's a spectrum, right? Some people are the most extreme support player ever. Some people, I would even say this is actually the most underrated part about Xyp9x. He never was a pure support. In fact, he actually had skill. He could even do a whole bunch of other things in the game. You don't just give him the worst spot every time. You give him certain infamously bad spots, and then other spots you give him an okay one because he can do more than he was always overqualified for the role. But here's what I think is like, in the modern day, I'm starting to think it almost does need to be a role on a team. And the reason why I say this is this. Think of the 2 best teams of 2021. Now, despite what everyone in recency bias is going to tell you, it wasn't G2 and Na'Vi. It was Na'Vi and Gambit. Both Na'Vi and Gambit have a player, Perfecto and fucking Inters, whose job, as far as I can tell, is don't die. Their job isn't kill people, be part of it. It's don't die, because you have so much skill and talent elsewhere. If you really can just hold a spot and not die and con with people and play off someone, the team's complete. Like, you're not going to lose games with players like that. So I almost feel like in the modern day, the reason I bring this up is because in NA, I feel like these players don't exist, mate. In NA, you have to basically, even if you're a supporter, you have to be some skilled player. Like, Rush used to be like a star entry at one point in time. He didn't grow up going, I'm the one with the shit aim, so I guess I'm the fucking support. No, he was forced into that role when they kept ramming stars in the team. So what do you think about this angle? Because I feel like in the modern day, a lot of fans are going to think it's not a thing, but I look at those guys, and them being a specialist is almost what makes those teams unbeatable at times.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Na'Vi and Gambit, I think they're kind of extremes because you have so many extreme stars on that roster. Like for example, when I heard there was a rumor that Xyp9x was going to join Cloud9 before they picked up Esatag, I thought that was going to be possibly the worst move in the last 3 years, because Xyp9x is a player, when he's got the stars in front of him, then he can do his little thing. He can do his little thing where he's left into good spots and he can clutch. But you see it when his team is struggling in front of him, he shits the bed because, I mean, he's not necessarily shitting the bed. He's just sucks because he's not given the opportunity to get into clutches that are winnable. And I think with Gambit and Na'Vi, you have the ability to have players that really are just like, yeah, stay alive and then clutch once in a while, and you're doing a good job. And the problem in NA is that it's an RWS based system. I think everyone in NA came up on ESEA, even though, I mean, maybe you're getting players now that came up on FACEIT. FACEIT was only getting big in like 2018. So you looked at players, and even for league stats, it was like, if your RWS is too low, you're not getting picked up for the next team. Right. So you either built a team from the ground up and went from open to MDL, or in which case all your best players, by the way, are getting stolen because they think they're way better than your team because they don't understand that roles exist, which they do, even though it's tilted me that all these pro players are like, roles don't exist, excuse me. It's always the best players in the best roles that say that shit, where it's just like, yeah, roles totally don't matter. Like,
the joke is, yes, Nico, you could be any role. You listen, you wouldn't be the same Nico you are, but you could be probably as good as, like, you know, the best entry on like the 19th best team. But yeah, in his brain, he thinks you could play every role, mate.
They think that their stats would be the same if they did everything. It doesn't make any fucking sense to me. Absolutely support, like, the support role exists, even though it tilted me when there was that push to say roles don't exist. Yeah, roles don't exist in that you have to be able to do everything, but there is the player that goes, I'll flash for you, and there's the player that goes, throw a flash for me. Those roles do actually exist, and NA misses it entirely. But I'm not certain that it then follows that you need like a hard support. I think that if you have a team as good as Na'Vi or Na'Vi or Gambit, you can afford to have a player like that, and it can be beneficial if you have that trio of just really, really, really strong players.
Yeah, I think, like, when you said support as a spectrum, I think that's like the best way that you can put it. And I do think that, yeah, it's definitely not a position on the map, right? Like, you could have somebody who's more supportive that is kind of playing by themselves just to kind of like cover a gap and like get information and like relay rotation timings and things that nature to the in-game leader or whatever. But also having someone more supportive who's actually like in the pack of entering is important, because you're the one tossing flashes to set up a guy who's going into a site or area of the map to get control. So I think that it's not a position. I think it's more of like a mentality, and it's something that you have to embrace. And I think that it can either go in a way where you have like one or two guys who are the primary ones that are kind of setting up people, or at the very least, you need everyone on the team to have some level of willingness to kind of take a step back from the spotlight and facilitate someone else on the team, whether it's like calling for a flash or being the one saying, hey, I'll flash for you or something like that. So I think that, like, let's say that support is like a meter that you have to fill to a certain level on a team, like a gas tank or something like that, right? Now, it may be that one player contributes more gas to that tank than another on the team, or it may be that it's like somehow equally distributed between like 4 players on your team or something like that. But at some point, that tank has to be filled. And whether you want to do that with 1 or 2 players or 3 of your players splitting it up or however it may be, yes, you do have to have someone who's willing to play the shit spot on CT side that no one wants to play, or that wants to be able to, you know, again, be the one tossing utility instead of going in to get the trade frags, or whatever the case may be. Someone who's willing to take a backseat for the better of the team. It's a mentality that you have to be able to embrace. And I do think that, as Vu said, unfortunately, it's really hard for you to be able to gauge whether someone has that mentality or not. It's not a stat that leaps off the page or something that you can necessarily view in a demo just by watching their gameplay. Yeah, to a degree, you could probably watch and see like what kind of nades they're throwing and like how often they're setting people up. Yeah, but a lot of it is primarily going to just be found out through playing with each other, maybe interviewing someone deeply and asking a bunch of questions. Like, I don't know, like it's so hard. And I do think a lot of time what it turns into is veterans kind of stepping down into that role who used to be stars. Like Rush is probably the best example of it. Like you said, he was a star entry fragger on Optic, you know, alongside Tarek whenever that team won E-League and things of that nature. But then when he went on to Cloud9, the one that won E-League Boston, he very much got relegated to being more of a support player, while like Automatic and Stewie and some of these other guys were more at the forefront of that team. So yeah, I think it is one of those things where it exists, but it's not, I don't know if you could call it like a finite role. I think it's more of something that just has to happen within a team, and it's either going to come from a collection of people or maybe like one or two key people who are willing to kind of be that person for the team.
This video was kindly supported by Ahmed Hadjou, Iskander, Matt Pugnatio, Rajcula, Thooorin, Travis Goff, ochs, Animosity, Butt Pounder 420, Hades, Jdubs, Jensen Goh, Joy, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and a special thanks goes out as always to Jerky's Minion, but also to Jeremy Dole. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? You want to ask me a question for one of my video AMAs? Want teasers? Find out who the guests are? Would you like to take part in a lengthy esports discussion with me? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.